Hi, and welcome back. For the first time in DreamFeed history, I think that we need to begin with a disclaimer. It's getting real. I need to be careful. This is my own speculation and opinion for unofficial entertainment purposes only. Please do your own research and form your own opinions. All parties are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This is not an attempt to intimidate any witnesses. This one is making me anxious. Maybe it's because the guy at Dunkin' Donuts has been upselling me on an extra shot of espresso in my coffee, but man, it feels like the weighted apprehension of when you know that you're really close to something so big, but you can't quite describe it. It feels like the first time that you visit the Grand Canyon and seeing something so vast and so deep makes you want to take one giant step backwards. Before any of us speculate or share opinions with a wider audience, we decide, consciously or not, what level of risk we're willing to take. What will happen if I'm wrong? Who may be harmed? The bar that I set for myself is this. Is it accurate enough and important enough that I'm willing to be sued for this? Am I willing to defend this in court? Does it align with the first of the 4 agreements? Be impeccable with your word. That's my mindset as this presentation was researched, organized, visualized, and recorded. That's how serious I am about what I am going to share with you. And getting all of this organized has taken such a long time. I'm so worried that I'm going to forget to advance the slides. You guys know that I don't edit, so usually if things go off the rails, I just delete the recording and start over. But this one, we may just need to make peace with the doorbell and the dog and the baby. This was supposed to be the sequel to the first 8 miracles, so if you haven't had a chance to scope that one out, be sure to watch that video first so that this one will make sense. I'll put the link in the comments. I had to honor my promise about that content before I could get to the new discoveries, so I just lumped it all into one presentation. Unlike some of my videos where you can just listen along, you're going to need to watch this one with your eyes. We're back to PowerPoint mode here because if I had tried to do it all in Canva, it would have taken me months, and I can't carry this alone on my heart for that long. Much like the previous group of miracles, today's details also defy time, space, distance, physics, logic, and perhaps more than anything, integrity. This video will cover the next 8 miracles, which stem from closer observations. I'm actually going to use the phrase forensic observations. The adjective forensic comes from the Latin word forensis, which means in open court or public. When you describe something as forensic, you usually mean that it has to do with finding evidence to solve a crime. It could also mean that it has to do with courts or the legal system. And this video meets that definition. These forensic observations led to some, I'm going to call them informed assumptions and informed inferences. So let's set our focus. We'll be looking at the time period of 12:11:09 a.m. through 12:21:05 a.m., which is an elapsed time of 9 minutes and 56 seconds. Things that I included in this analysis are Apple Health data, phone records, Google Maps and measurement tools, dimensions of lot and house, unbiased testimony, reports, and informed assumptions. Things that I excluded from this analysis are ways, because between the offset clock and the inaccuracies due to poor satellite reception, it seemed like more of a confusion than a clarification point. I also excluded biased and unreliable witness testimony and non-standardized timestamps. Here are some of the relevant data points that we'll be using. The 12:14 a.m. text, "Where to?" Calls exchanged between Jen and John at 12:14 and 12:18. John's distance traveled between 12:11 and 12:21. The distance that John's phone traveled during 12:31 and 12:32. It was actually only a period of 20 seconds, though, between those two times. Okay. Have you ever looked at something that you've looked at 100 times and the 101st time it clicks? That has happened to me twice in the past 24 hours. Bonus miracles. They gave me chills. They still do. We'll start with the next round of miracles and finish with the jaw droppers. I hope that the grand finale is as powerful to you as it was to me, because let me tell you, my heart is still pounding from those discoveries. So let's work backwards from entering 34 Fairview. Miracle 16. John likely removed his shoes at the door. Supporting details include: John would have removed his shoes at the door, or at least paused to ask the homeowner's preference out of respect. Nicole Albert indeed cared about not tracking mud and slush in. That's why she claims that she used the front door. A 5-second gap between events recorded in the Apple Health data implies that the phone was not in motion at that time. If removing shoes is such a critical detail that the Commonwealth implies that this makes Karen a murderer, then we need to give it the same prominence in the narrative. And let me show you the Apple Health data again. See how there's a 5-second gap between the end of interval 1 and the start of interval 2? This aligns perfectly with the small gap at 12:21, either pausing to knock at the door or pausing to remove his shoes. Then we have Miracle 15. John entered 34 Fairview at 12:21 a.m. This is a detail that I almost missed. Remember how Jennifer McCabe had 2 interviews before she voluntarily, and I am using air quotes, handed over her phone? There was the one with Proctor and Buchanan on the morning of January 29th that didn't get written down and submitted for months, apparently from memory. However, the interview on February 1st, conducted by MSP trooper Kathleen Prince, was recorded and submitted immediately. And that report, taken by not Trooper Proctor, indicates that Jen's first "here," when she first saw the dark SUV outside, occurred at 12:21, not 12:27. It was 12:21. And during that interview, Jen would have also had her phone right there in front of her to verify the exact time. So this detail seems more credible than the later evolution of the timelines. Combined with John's ping in the Albert neighborhood at 12:19:33 a.m. and the 12:18:47 call that lasted 36 seconds, it seems like the call was probably I think we must have missed the turn. All of these houses look the same. All right, we just turned around. Oh, there's the turn for Fairview. How did we miss it? Okay, we're looking to the right. Oh, I see your car there in the driveway. See you in a sec. I mean, do the math between those 2 timestamps. It's 46 seconds, and the call was 36 of those. Enough to guide someone to the location. And I, for one, am not at all surprised that they missed the turn. Here's the turn during the day, and here it is at night, and here it is on a snowy night. And I'm not judging here, but look, all 4 houses where they missed the turn look the same. 1970s overhang colonial style with attached 2-car garages. They all have brick ground floors with stairs leading up to the front door. Their second stories have siding and windows with shutters. I would be confused, would you? Here they are from a different perspective. I mean, seriously, in the dark, I can see the confusion. But despite reaching the house, Karen and John remain in the car for a few more minutes, with Jen's view of the Lexus obscured by her own big Denali. And if you listen to your intuition, you can almost hear the conversation play out. Are you sure this is the right house? Well, that's Jen's Denali in the driveway. But didn't they say it was somebody's birthday party? This doesn't feel like a party. It's a party. Well, then where are the cars? Where are the people? Maybe it was just a family gathering or something. Are you sure we were actually invited? Can we make sure that we're welcome here? Nobody extended the invite to me. I didn't hear the invite extended to you. Well, Jen is clearly expecting us. She gave us the address. It would be rude to just ghost them. I mean, I guess. But it would also be rude to crash a family gathering. Look, let me run in, check it out, scope out the vibe, show face to Jen. If it's all good, I'll text you to come in. It'll take 2 seconds. That takes us to Miracle 14. John likely used the front door, not the breezeway door. Based on everything that we've learned about John, he was almost compulsively a respectful rule follower. Therefore, it is reasonable to assume that John would not walk on someone's lawn, that John would use the formal front door unless specifically directed otherwise, and there's no evidence that John was directed to use the breezeway. No text messages, no statement from Jen, etc. Additionally, Nicole reported entering through the front door moments earlier. If there really was light snow, footprints would indicate that this is the preferred door. Nicole reported that Colin was waiting at the front door for his ride. The McCabe's claimed that they were waiting for John at the front door. The front lights were likely on, and the main solid door was likely open, with only the glass storm door closed. John's Apple Health data supports this point of entry in terms of distance traveled as well as on the interval timestamp. But there's a lot more to unpack here, and I feel like I need to show my work, as the math teachers always used to say. So I used public records to track down the lot dimensions. By the way, the curve along the street frontage is enough that the surveyors needed to measure in 2 segments. And I used the public records to track down the house dimensions. Then I used those measurements for both my scaled model and for this map, showing the distance in feet by segment that John walked. 50 feet from the Lexus to the brick path. 14 feet is the length of the brick path crossing in front of the breezeway. 18 feet is half the length of the main house. And 6 feet is approximately the distance from the brick pathway up the front steps to the door. This totals 88 feet, and we know that this happened after the car ride because otherwise the phone would have stopped gathering data. It stops when the human motion stops, and or in increments of up to 10 minutes if the duration of the human's motion exceeds 10 minutes. So, if 88 of the almost 327 feet that John walked during that increment occurred at 34 Fairview, that means that John walked approximately 239 feet at the start of the interval. That was when he was exiting the waterfall and entering the Lexus. Miracle 13. Honestly, I'm not even sure why this should fall under miracle territory, because it is so blisteringly obvious to anyone with more than sticks for brains. You have to approach the breezeway to reach the front door. I'm still stunned that Attorney Brennan tried to use this as an example of Karen changing her story. Look, you're literally approaching the breezeway side door up until the moment that you pass it. As you walk up the driveway, you're approaching the breezeway door. As you turn left onto the brick path, you're approaching the breezeway door. As long as you are traveling up to the house politely and respectfully, you are approaching the breezeway door. Now, if you are some kind of uncultured swine who tramples across the grass, I suppose technically you could get to the front door without approaching the breezeway door, but then you'd be a pig. Miracle 12. There was no Jeep at the mailbox. Karen would have needed to drive around it to pull forward across the front of the property. Ryan Nagel couldn't have seen all 3 lights from Karen's vehicle through it. So why did the McCabe's lie about the Jeep being at the mailbox? And why did Brian Higgins lie and claim that his Jeep was gray? It hurts my heart that I need to show you this because it feels invasive even though I know that it is perfectly legal. I removed the address info and private info. I'm not even going to say the owner's name. Y'all are smart enough to put 2 and 2 together. I will just call your attention to a few details. Notice the architecture in both photos. Some might call this style a cape. The man's truck is dark in color with a tonneau cover. I think that's what they're called, the lid on there. The man's Jeep is white, 2 doors, black top. That Jeep is not gray. It was even whiter in the original image, but that one was all at a wonky angle, so I had to straighten it out. If that Jeep is gray, then color me purple and paint the town red. Take in this moment. You are likely looking at 2 of the vehicles the man drove on the night of January 29th, 2022. Miracle 11. The Nagel vehicle couldn't see John. Okay, so Karen's SUV is the blue car. The Nagel vehicle is orange. Remember from the previous video that Jen's car was parked so far back and it was so tall at 6 feet 5 inches that it would have blocked any view of John, who was 6 feet 2 inches, maybe 6'3" with shoes, from the arriving Nagel vehicle. While the Nagel vehicle yielded at Cedar Crest, it's very likely that the glare of Karen's brake lights, along with the divided attention of looking for the house number among similar-looking houses and texting his sister Julie, probably prevented them from seeing John exit the car. Within 3 strides, oops, there I go, goofing things up. Within 3 strides, John was next to Jen McCabe's Denali, which stood 2 inches taller than him, blocking all visibility. Miracle 10. Karen and John's route from the waterfall to 34 Fairview was influenced by several factors. Yes, it was partially because her vehicle was street side parked facing the opposite way, which was north, while the others were parked in the parking lot. The blue pills could choose whether to turn left or right, while Karen's direction was slightly more predetermined from the parking position. But we need to remember something else. John wasn't a lifelong Cantonite. He'd been at the Meadows house for 4 years, 2 of which were anomalies due to the pandemic. Prior to that, he lived with the kids in Kristen's house up in the Ponky neighborhood until the kids were 8 and 11. When I plotted Karen and John's route on the map, in order to force the map to go up Dedham and left onto Cedar Crest, I needed to add the stop at JFK Elementary. That's the image on your right. And I heard it in my ears. Oh, come on, guys. Come over to my sister's house for a nightcap. It's not far. It's right there near JFK. John would know where JFK Elementary was. The kids likely had sporting events and practices there. but he might only know how to get there from the way that he first learned it. This happens to me whenever I go back to my childhood hometown. Now that I'm older, I only remember one way to get to certain places, and it's usually landmark based and on main roads. It's generally not the most efficient route, but it's what I remember. I think it's probably a neuroplasticity thing. Who knows? So I plotted the address of the first house, Kristen's house, on the map, and suddenly the route made perfect sense. I think that they were using JFK Elementary as a landmark, and they were doing okay until they got onto Cedar Crest. They called Jen, probably right after they missed the left turn onto Fairview. With the cloud cover rolling in, no wonder the GPS Waze was all scrambled. You know, back when there were those little satellite dishes instead of cable or streaming, like Dish or DirecTV? And on stormy days, the signal would get all scrambly, which was most unfortunate because those were the days when all you could really do was stay inside and watch TV. Satellite signals can get really weird during the weather. Miracle 9. Karen parked within 239 feet of the Waterfall Bar and Grill. To prove that John entered the house, I needed to figure out where Karen parked. Determining the exact parking place was the most daunting task that I have faced in this entire analysis, actually, this entire project, because if the math fit, my theory was on target. But if it didn't fit, this would be my Waterloo. I had a vague memory that she had parked on street side on Washington, but there was a rumor circulating that she had parked at the Walgreens parking lot across from C.F. McCarthy's. Any way I sliced the math, the Walgreens parking lot was out of range. I was getting so anxious. Not that I'm afraid of admitting when I'm wrong, I just don't enjoy being wrong. I strive for accuracy, which I think is probably a relatable feeling. So I kept looking, just looking and looking, from street view, from aerial view, and back to street view. And then I noticed something. To reach the Walgreens parking lot in the most John O'Keefe way from the waterfall, you wouldn't hop over hedges or do any weird parkour moves. You'd walk on the sidewalk, and then you'd need to climb a staircase of 6 steps. Since this was during the same interval as ascending the Albert's front steps, the pair of partial floors during that interval would have logged a flight or floor during that segment, and it didn't. It was a minor sigh of relief. Still puzzled, I asked on Reddit. Now remember, Reddit can be a cesspool or a jacuzzi depending on where you are and who you're interacting with. There are some combative, sour grapes on there, but there are also some sincerely kind people, some of whom have amazing memory recall. While I waited and hoped and prayed for a definitive answer, I turned back to Google Street View and started counting the northbound parking spots on Washington Street between Waterfall and Walgreens. There were 7. The distance between the closest and furthest spot was approximately 317 feet. There were only 4 spots within 239 feet of the waterfall. 3 if we're being realistic, and 2 if we're being conservative. And then Reddit came through. 2 members pointed me toward testimony and documentation of where Karen had parked. And that was from Karina Kolakithis and also from the state's case summary that they present. And you can pause this screen if you need to and read up on it. Or you can take my word for it because goodness knows I have read through it all. So the math worked, and this time my sigh of relief was so loud It startled the dog. Karen basically had to be either here or here. So, before I show you the two jaw dropper discoveries, let's recap in forward motion. John and Karen close out the tab, exit the waterfall, part ways with the rest of the group, and get into the car. During this time, John walks approximately 239 feet. They travel northbound because Karen's vehicle is already facing that direction and they're using JFK Elementary as a landmark. Everyone else is pulling out of the parking lot onto Washington so that they can take the most direct and probably for them familiar route. The decision to take the different route means that Karen and John arrive at 34 Fairview from the north, with the Lexus pointing south and with the passenger door facing the house. They, along with the Nagel vehicle, which was coming from the Hillside Pub, are the only two vehicles that arrive from the north. Everyone else arrived from the south and would need to pull into the driveway to reorient to facing south. Hence Brian Higgins' plow antics story. He needed his vehicle to be pointing south for the cover story to work. John exits the car, and within a few steps, he is invisible to the newly arrived Nagel vehicle. In true John form, he would never dream of disrespecting someone by walking across their lawn. He walks up the edge of the driveway, 50 feet, approaching the breezeway, and turns left onto the brick path, still approaching the breezeway, before passing the breezeway door, 14 feet, and half of the front of the house, 18 feet, and then jogging up the 4 front steps to the formal front door. Karen pulls forward so that the newly arrived vehicle can have access to the same path that John took. There is no Jeep to pull around, and Ryan Nagel maintains visibility of all 3 rear lights as Karen, likely out of overcautious reflex, keeps her foot on the brake despite being parked. Once inside, in typical John form, he removes his shoes or at least pauses to offer. This takes us to the next segment of the Apple Health data from 12:21 a.m. to 12:24, which we will review in the next video because there's a lot of confusion and false info going around about the 3 floors. We need to clear up some misconceptions and show how things really went down. And trust me, they did go down. So, we've proven that John entered the house. This means we just need to figure out how John's phone and body got to the edge of the property. Now for the discoveries, the bonus miracles. While noodling through the parking spot dilemma, I learned to use the Google Maps measurement tool. Then I compared the Google measurements against the public records data to see if it aligned, and surprisingly it did. How we can have this advanced technology in the world and somehow the Canton police are still using solo cups and grocery bags and every camera in that town went offline or disappeared that night is beyond me. The Apple Health data indicated that John's phone had a final journey that lasted for 20 seconds across 36 steps and 83.53 feet. 83.53 feet in 20 seconds and 36 steps is an intentional stride. On a treadmill, it would be 2.85 miles per hour, a casual but purposeful pace. Put it this way, it's faster than you'd walk through the aisles at Target. It's the opposite of moseying. It's the opposite of meandering. This wasn't wandering around. This wasn't stumbling and staggering in a circle, woozy. This wasn't reversing course of arrival down the driveway and then walking down the street because the distance wasn't 168 feet. Besides, John doesn't walk on lawns. Bottom line, this wasn't John. Can we work it backwards? Where exactly had the phone originated? What was 83.53 feet from the phone's final resting place? I started ruling out options. It wasn't a reversal of John's path of entry into the house and down the street, because at 168 feet, that was too far, it would take too long, and the motion of the phone, as documented, only lasted 20 seconds. It wasn't an ascent up the bulkhead stairs to the south gate and along the tree line, because no flights were logged during that time, which means that the phone was already at ground level. Besides, that distance was 118 feet, too far, and with so many pit stops, the bulkhead doors, opening the gate, 20 seconds wasn't reasonable. On a hunch, I placed the marker at the phone's final destination, and I drew the line to the edge of the dining room table inside of 34 Fairview. And there it was, 83.42 feet. I needed to check. Even though it was a simple enough deduction, I used a calculator to make sure there were no careless errors. 0.11 feet. Now, if you have dyslexia too, or even if you don't, numbers can be so abstract. So, how much is 0.11 feet? My heart was pounding so loudly I couldn't think straight. 11 inches? I did the math again. Thank goodness for modern technology. 1.3 inches. Just to be sure, I tried the math a different way. 0.03 of a meter is how many inches? 1.18 inches. I don't know why those numbers are different, and I don't even care. That trajectory yielded a distance that was roughly an inch away from what was logged on the Apple Health data. And that was pretty freaking amazing. But let's not stop here, because you guys, look at this graphic. It's the very definition of a beeline, to go quickly in a straight, direct course. If somebody asked me to draw a beeline, it would look exactly like this. It's so purposeful and direct. But who would stride exactly there? No hesitation. And why? What was over there? I zoomed out a click. My gaze followed the path of the beeline. Deputy Chief Neighbor's driveway. Exact same trajectory. Right to Deputy Chief's driveway. Snowy night. Parking ban. Hey, Tommy, can I park in your driveway for a little bit? Gonna go wish Albert's kid a happy birthday. I made the map snowy. I made the map not snowy. I zoomed in on Deputy Chief's driveway, and I felt sick when I realized that those trees, that fence, the placement of that car, oh God, Karen and John wouldn't see the Jeep. No matter which direction they arrived from, John wouldn't realize that his aggressive adversary was even there, giving his adversary a slight upper hand with the element of surprise. Who left shortly after arriving at 34 Fairview? Who left shortly after seeing a tall male with dark hair enter the house? Who testified that he left around 12:30 a.m. to supposedly go move cars at the Canton PD, a 3 to 4 minute trip that somehow took him until 1:30 a.m. to arrive? And whose surveillance footage from 2 cameras, one at the front and one at the driveway, were unilaterally determined to have revealed nothing of significance, so the recordings were never entered into evidence? And it clicked. That's why they were so insistent that the Jeep was at the mailbox. It was an alibi to place Higgins away from the opposite corner of the property and definitely not concealed at Deputy Chief Neighbor's house. But it was still a half-baked plan. If Higgins was at the mailbox, then Karen didn't have the space to do the maneuver that she's accused of. What Mr. Beeline seems to have overlooked is that by testifying to departing around 12:30, he's tying himself to the final movements of John's phone. And again, if you listen, you can hear the conversation. Jen, what direction was the SUV facing? That way, down toward Chapman. Higgins, go down to the station. Keep your ears open for any calls. Come back with your truck. Not your work truck, your GMC, the one with the lid. Here, take his phone, wipe your prints, toss it out on the curb in case she has that Find My Phone on it. If she comes around, we'll say that we never saw them. Didn't even know they were here. Even if she finds his phone, maybe he tried to walk home or something. Not our problem. Too bad, so sad. Hope you find him. This'll buy us time to figure out where to put him. In the meanwhile, nobody text and nobody turn off your phones. If we all go offline, it'll look suspicious. Phone calls only and only if necessary. Make it brief. If you absolutely have to call, keep it under a minute. Business as usual. Don't do anything weird or impulsive. It's just a usual Friday night. Jen, what would you usually do if someone didn't show up? I don't know, call him, text him a couple times? Good girl, do that. Keep it light, keep it casual. The less you say, the better. It gives me chills just thinking about it. And that beeline is haunting. If Higgins was parked at Kelleher's, well, it was an ambush, a setup, which would explain why the spiritual medium kept hearing that word from John again and again and again. So Brian Higgins arrived first to 34 Fairview. Brian Higgins saw a tall, dark-haired male arrive to the house. Brian Higgins says the man was there briefly. Brian Higgins said that he, Higgins, was only at the house for around half an hour. Brian Higgins said that he, Higgins, departed around 12:30 a.m. Brian Higgins said that he, Higgins, made a beeline out of there without formal goodbyes. Coincidentally, John's phone was also at 34 Fairview briefly and also made a beeline out of the house at 12:31 a.m. So we can check the phone off the list. There's only one thing left to prove. You know how I had been so certain that the exit path was up the bulkhead and to the south gate along the tree line to the final resting place of John's body? Well, that is not what the spiritual medium saw. I pushed back a little, but she was adamant, and like I've said, Rochelle has earned my trust. She has come through with details about cases for years. So I re-examined those real estate pictures, willing myself to see another exit strategy. And you guys, we have been so busy looking at the corner of the property where John's body was found that we missed something. Look, and look again, and look closer. You could back a vehicle right up to that gate, a Jeep or a truck, maybe a truck that has one of those tonneau cover lids. Where was that truck parked after he'd returned from New York? Was it down at the Canton PD? Was this all part of the swapping around cars? Because it sure would be handy to have a pickup truck to move a body. And look at that. It is snuggled in so far back that it might not even show up on 33 Fairview's Ring camera. The details certainly wouldn't. And it wouldn't show up on 31 Fairview's cameras either. But first, you'd need to get Brian Albert's work car out of the way. The Ford Edge that always seems to be in that bonus lane. But where would you put it? And if you drove a body from there to the front corner of the property, you could back up using the edge as cover, and none of the cameras would see the details. Now, this does not absolve Deputy Chief Neighbor, because remember how Chris Watts' neighbor had video of the cars moving around at strange hours? And remember how useful it was in getting that nut to crack? The Ford Edge near the flagpole was adequate coverage for both neighbors' cameras and for the plows and passers-by. As long as the Ford Edge was parked there, the plow driver or any other passers-by wouldn't see the body. Can you see the body in my scaled model? Because it's there. It's lying there on the contact paper grid just behind the SUV. John entered 34 Fairview. Mr. Beeline escorted John's phone to the edge of the property on the way back to retrieve his concealed vehicle, and John's body was moved out through the north gate, not the south. Check, check, check. I think we're getting closer, guys. Now it's time to dissect the 1221 to 1224 segment and account for those 80 steps and 3 floors in John's health data. And then it will be check, 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 and checkmate. I'm pretty sure that we can do it. Maybe with a little help from our friends. If you have found value in this video, please tell me by giving it a thumbs up like, and please double check that you have subscribed because the next one is going to be a doozy. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and take care of our community. I love you.